One of the reasons why I accepted a key for Macross Shooting Insight is because I'm an anime and Macross fan. Despite not being into Macross as I am with Gundam, I still enjoyed it for what it is. My decision was quickly proven to be the right one because almost immediately, you're met with great looking artwork during cutscenes. This game is a crossover between the different Macross shows, so it's cool being able to take in parts of Macross that I've yet to experience. I may not know who some of the characters are, but at the very least I'm able to enjoy them for the artwork that they are. I felt that I'd made the right decision to accept the key for MSI, but around an hour or so into it I started to question that. It's because when played as is, MSI is much harder than I thought it would be. I've beaten games that I consider to be really tough, but that's usually because there's a degree of fairness built into them. Initially, I felt that wasn't the case with MSI. It's because the missions were hard and more or less marathons. MSI offers simple gameplay, but there's still a lot to take in and be aware of. That's the name of the game, seen as how MSI is a shmup, but it was harder than some of the ones I've previously played. With other shmups, I'd be able to make use of checkpoints to make a difficult experience more manageable. That wasn't the case with MSI. From the start, the missions are split up into different parts that need to be beaten consecutively. Overall, this is cool, mainly because each part tends to offer a change of viewpoints. It was nice being able to use the different forms of the Valkyrie. Not only did this offer more variety with MSI's gameplay, it worked to showcase more of what the Macross franchise has to offer. The views ranged from being side-scroller, top-down, and a more Space Harrier / Star Fox point of view. I was particularly fond of that last one because of how clearly I was able to take in the view of the Valkyrie and the action playing out on screen. Unfortunately, this was one of the most underutilized out of all of them. There were, however, drawbacks to this point of view. At times I felt that it was difficult to tell when to dodge a projectile. That could just be a me problem, but I found that it was hard to gauge the difference between a near and far projectile because they mostly appeared to be on the same level as the Valkyrie. Going back to MSI's difficulty, I found it to be such a hassle that at one point I was thinking of throwing in the towel and moving on. After looking into MSI's options and seeing that it was possible to make the game easier, I did so. I hate admitting that, mainly because I enjoy / pride myself on being able to overcome the default difficulty level or even higher ones of games, but sometimes it's just too much for me. I like to think that I'm capable of overcoming a lot, but when I'm having to do so on a time limit, that makes it even more of a hassle for me. It was possible to change the difficulty setting to easy, but I decided to stick to normal and alter the health regeneration. The other options involved having a slow regen and a faster one. I stuck to the faster one because I wanted to comfortably experience what the game had to offer. That really helped make the game more manageable, and it's one of the main reasons why I was able to beat it. Earlier on, I mentioned enjoying MSI because I'm an anime fan and enjoy being able to take in that kind of artwork. For the most part, I was satisfied with that, but during cutscenes it felt like overkill. There was a lot of dialogue and that left me wanting to get to the point where I could play. Don't get me wrong, I got the gist of MSI's story, but that was one part that felt like it wasn't as refined as it could have been. This was also seen during gameplay. There was constant dialogue on the bottom right side corner, and at times this was distracting. I wanted to understand what was being said by the game's characters, but the problem is that on top of having to deal with hectic combat, I was also being bombarded with a barrage of dialogue. I got the feeling that the devs of MSI wanted to offer a dense experience. I can understand wanting to do that, but it could have been in a more efficient way. Star Fox makes use of dialogue during gameplay, but there were also moments where there'd be an active pause so that story could play out. That wasn't the case with MSI, and I felt like I had to make a choice between keeping an eye on the gameplay or ignoring what was being discussed. At times I could take a quick glance, but it wasn't enough to understand. MSI is the kind of game where what you see is what you get. Sometimes that's bad, but that's not the case with MSI. It's a shmup game that's not as one-dimensional as some of those games can be, and overall, it's largely meant to be enjoyed by fans of the Macross franchise. It would have been cool had MSI done a lot more with the depth that the Macross franchise has to offer, but knowing how complicated anime licensing can be, I can see why things like fully animated cutscenes or a fan favorite character were excluded. I brought that up because the original main character of SDF Macross wasn't part of MSI. I'm just shooting from the hip here, so I could be wrong, but I was still bummed out to see that Hikaru wasn't playable. I ended up playing as Isamu Dyson because I'm really fan of Macross Plus, and he was really the only pilot I was familiar with. After beating the main story, I chose Gamlen Kizaki from arcade mode. It was really only because I saw that his stats were well balanced. It also helped that I like his Valkyrie. Arcade mode was more manageable because the missions weren't as lengthy as they were in the main missions. It also helped that I was once again able to change the settings up to make things easier. It was during arcade mode that I noticed how the other Valkyries not only have different fire patterns, but also offered new gimmicks. For Gamlen, his was the fire pattern to start firing in the direction that I happened to be turning towards. That was helpful because it made it so that even if I happened to be dodging incoming fire, I could still damage enemies across the screen. I tried a different pilot, but when I noticed that their Valkyrie's firing pattern was too limited, I decided to stick to Isamu and Gamlen. It's because MSI is the kind of game where you want your attacks to cover as much space as possible. When using a Valkyrie with only 1 or 2 streams of fire, it was like making things harder than they needed to be. I don't mind having played this way because that's usually the mindset I have across all sorts of games. Being that Macross Shooting Insight is a game dedicated to an anime franchise, it's largely meant to be played by Macross and anime fans. While that's true, it's still possible to be enjoyed by Shmup fans and gamers in general. Knowing how some can be towards anime games, that still won't be enough to convince them to give it a try. MSI isn't as weeby as some anime games can be, so if you're open-minded enough, give it a try. I don't see myself coming back to Macross Shooting Insight as I have with other games, but from what I got out of it, I'm happy. How do you feel about changing difficulty settings to make a game easier to play? What's your favorite anime game? Are you the kind of player that's turned away from a game if it features anime aesthetics? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.